Haiti is a failed state. On February 24th, 2025, the first international peacekeeper was killed by gangs. How did we get here? And what happens next? Today on Democracy Dialogues. Haiti has a problem. It's spelled Gangs. Brutal gangs that control up to 90% of Port-au-Prince and expanding rapidly. Violence is escalating, fueled by trafficking in guns and drugs. Massacres in late 2024 claimed over 350 lives. International airplanes are being shot at. Humanitarian supplies are being raided, and hospitals are being ransacked. 1 million citizens have been displaced. The government doesn't really exist. President Moise was assassinated in 2021, and no elected officials remain since the last election in 2016. New elections are nominally slated for November. An undersized peacekeeping contingent from Kenya dutifully toils on. Meanwhile, Haiti was one of the key topics when Marco Rubio traveled to the Dominican Republic as part of his first trip as Secretary of State. My guest today on Democracy Dialogues is noted independent journalist Michael Deibert, who has covered Haiti since 1997. His articles have appeared worldwide in top newspapers and journals, and he's received numerous awards for his reporting from some of the world's most difficult locations. He travels often to the country and speaks the local language fluently. He's the author of 2 books on Haiti and several others, and is currently writing a third about the Moise assassination. Michael Deibert, welcome to Democracy Dialogues.
Thank you very much for having me, Eric.
You travel frequently to Haiti. What's the mood there? Is it a mood of optimism, pessimism?
I mean, I was last there in late October, and I'm pretty regular daily contact with people on the ground, and I think the mood I would describe as despair and near panic in some ways. I mean, the armed groups that control the large majority of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and other areas in the countryside, including in this area called the Artibonite Valley, are essentially gaining new ground every week. The peacekeeping mission, well, not peacekeeping mission, but rather the security mission, is still understaffed. I mean, I think they just recently got somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000, and it was originally supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000. I think there's between, and again, it's hard to come by solid numbers for this, between 9,000 to 12,000 active duty police in Haiti, most of whom are in the capital. But when you have, this coalition of gangs who go under this umbrella of vivre ensemble, which means live together in Creole, by my calculations, are somewhere between 13 and 14,000 under arms. You can see how it's a very dicey situation. And unfortunately, neighborhoods keep getting taken over by these gangs, and the population is driven out. I mean, that happened just very recently to a neighborhood called Solino. It happened also even more recently to a neighborhood called Delma 30 and some areas of a neighborhood called Tabar, which is a kind of suburb of Port-au-Prince towards the east. And they've developed, I would say, a modus operandi that's quite effective, these gangs, whereas they have these probing missions to go see how much land they can take over and how much area they can take over. And when the security forces deploy their people, then they cause some trouble, fait des odes, as they say in Creole, in another part of town to draw them away. And they're trying to take over the areas in the hills above Port-au-Prince and then to push up from the areas they control towards the waterfront. So basically that the small section of Port-au-Prince where I wouldn't call it normal life, but where life not under gang control somewhat continues, is getting smaller and smaller and more compressed.
So this isn't just a Port-au-Prince issue, this is a national issue in terms of the gangs, or is it just the major cities, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is certainly Port-au-Prince is the most severely affected by the gangs, but also, in the Artibonite Valley, which is, as you drive north out of Port-au-Prince, you have the Caribbean on your left, and you're going towards a city called Gonaïves, and after Gonaïves, you're going to Cap-Haïtien.
Yeah.
The area between Port-au-Prince and Gonaïves is really extremely, kind of pockmarked with different armed groups that are controlling different areas. Just a couple days ago, a friend of mine told me that they had taken over this area called Casal, which they hadn't before, which is a village in the Artibonite. And, one of the major gangs in Haiti that used to go by the name of the Taliban, they're run by this guy called Jeff General Jeff, who runs the Taliban, if you could imagine it, run or a place called Canaan, which actually was originally created as a kind of a place for displaced people after the 2010 earthquake.
What are the gangs looking for? I mean, you've described them as disparate. They're not all under one centralized control, obviously. What are they looking for? Are these common criminals? Are they just nihilists trying to destroy things? Are they looking for corruption? Are they looking for political power? Some combination? What are they looking for?
I mean, that's one of the real questions that is very pertinent to the situation in Haiti right now, I would say. You know, I mean, some of them, such as Jimmy Cherizier, who's known as Barbecue, who's kind of their porte-parole, kind of their spokesman. You know, he has really a rhetoric kind of against the elites and traditional politicians, et cetera, et cetera. And it must be said that the formation, the kind of genesis of these gangs was in Haiti's political and economic class. They were the ones who kind of started letting this genie out of the bottle.
So this is interesting. Let's explore this a little bit, because normally people think, well, gangs are sort of, from an inner city environment, downtrodden, maybe common crime to, because they're poverty stricken or something like this. You're saying this is a different model.
Yeah, and that's why, even though I sometimes slide into it myself, I generally try to refer to them as armed groups rather than gangs, because I think sometimes that conjures the image of like MS-13 or Barrio 18 in El Salvador, and these are quite a bit different.
Yeah.
So in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I mean, the kind of genesis of the gangs, the template was created by Jean-Bertrand Aristide and the Famille Lavalas party in Haiti. And a lot of these kids who took over what I would call kind of the traditional base, as they call them, the base of political activism in these poor neighborhoods, were replaced by a lot of young kids, many of whom kind of grew up or existed in the orbit of this home for street kids that Aristide ran when he was a priest, called La Famille C'est la Vie, the family is life. And, they became, I would say, they became sucked into it, not quite knowing what they were doing. And at that generation, I think they very much thought of themselves as kind of political revolutionaries, so at the vanguard of a political change.
And this was in the early 90s?
Late 1990s, early 2000s.
Late 1990s, early 2000s.
And in fact, although it often gets overlooked, the armed rebellion that began against Aristide in 2003 did not begin with Guy Philippe and the guys who came across from the Dominican Republic, but it began with a gang called L'Armée Cannibale, the Cannibal Army, in Gonaïves, that had previously been loyal to the government, but decided that the government had killed their leader. They thought Aristide had killed their leader, so they rose up and killed a bunch of cops, etc. Aristide was overthrown in 2004, and then for 2 years you had this violent series of clashes called Operation Baghdad between the gangs, the formerly loyal gangs, and what was then the UN peacekeeping mission led by Brazil and the Haitian police. When René Perval came back into power in 2006, he was elected, he replaced an unelected interim government. He kind of gave them an ultimatum that was like, look, now you have some voice in the government, give us peace or rest in peace. And there was a modus vivendi between his government and the gangs, but they did not disarm. There was, government programs in their neighborhoods to try and keep the temperature down a little bit. But what was really terrifying and disappointing to me is, rather than looking at, what happened to Aristide and his overthrow and using that as a cautionary tale, Haiti's political class and its economic actors, not all, but many, looked at it as kind of a user's manual for how they wanted to go about. And so you had different political groups and different business interests funding and organizing these gangs in these really poor and deprived neighborhoods. And this is one thing that I think is also important to understand, is that the desperation and the marginalization of these neighborhoods is the fertile ground on which these groups grow. And you can defeat them militarily, perhaps, but if you don't kind of change the material conditions in these areas, they will be right back in 3 or 4 years.
And I want to get to that in a second, but I want to also explore the funding issue. You've said that various gangs are being funded by various, political factions or entities in Haiti itself. Was that to gain their own political power? Was it to create street armies to impose something, or voter turnout, or what was the purpose of funding violent groups like
that? I mean, it was a little bit of both. I mean, it was the idea that, okay, the people who want to protest against me, whoever me is, and this could be going up to the level of the president to down to a local like deputy in some rural community or whatever, are not going to be allowed to, because these armed guys are going to break the demonstration. But it also then became gradually, and this is the thing, is that it became to a point where if you wanted to campaign in Grand Ravine, for example, which is one of these very poor neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince, you had to do so with the kind of blessing of the gang boss there. And if you, that's not the only place that's the case. And as the state, and I often say in these neighborhoods, it's not even about reestablishing the presence of the state; it's establishing it for the first time. And these, as the federal government kind of sank lower and lower in its ability to influence events, these gangs got more powerful and more powerful. And then finally, towards the end of Jovenel Moïse's term before he got assassinated, then certainly during the term of Ariel Henry, the interim prime minister who was overthrown, they surpassed the ability of the state to kind of exercise force of arms in the street.
Moïse assassinated in July 2021.
Correct.
And there has been no effective leadership since his assassination, and since 2016, there's been no elected official.
Yeah, that's correct. And I mean, with the assassination of Jovenel in 2021, you kind of lost the last thread of constitutionality in Haiti. I mean, there was no, Ariel Henry had been announced to be the prime minister, but he had not been confirmed. There was not really a functioning parliament at the time. So he ruled with basically no constitutional or legal right to do so. And with, I must say, the endorsement of the international community, puzzlingly to many people like myself. And then he was overthrown, and for some reason, the CARICOM and some other interests, including the U.S., thought it was a good idea to basically kind of pick representatives of the political class that had brought Haiti over the precipice in the first place to run this transitional council, which also has, I mean, things are worse in Haiti now than they were a year ago.
With elections scheduled for November of this year.
Yes, which will completely not happen.
Yeah. You've referenced the international peacekeeping force led by the Kenyans. Several hundred folks, several thousand are probably required, but we're not seeing necessarily the type of results that people were hoping for. So what does it require for the international community, not just to hold the line, but really begin to roll back some of this violence and roll back some of the gang gains in the country to restore peace and, frankly, stability to the Haitian population?
Yeah, I think, I mean, now, as I said, I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 of this international security mission of a promised 5,000. Now, I think if you had 5,000 of these, a patchwork of Kenyans and people from Jamaica or wherever, countries that had pledged security forces, I think we would be having a very different scenario in Port-au-Prince than we're having right now. Because I think that could really help turn the tide. Right now, I think more than anything else, it's a real manpower issue. There's not enough police. There's not enough people from the international security mission to confront these gangs that have had, at this point, years to entrench themselves in a huge section of Port-au-Prince. I mean, the fact that, Champ de Mars, which is the main kind of square in downtown Port-au-Prince, it's what used to be the National Palace is right off of it in a lot of government offices. I mean, to the east of Champ de Mars, to the west of Champ de Mars, that's a complete no man's land, gang land, completely controlled by the gangs now. Government offices cannot operate there.
What's driving the gangs right now financially? Is it drugs? Is it extortion?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, for years, as I said, they kind of had this patronage relationship with political and economic actors. Over the years, that has changed somewhat, and they have gotten so swollen. Their coffers have been really swollen by kidnapping, by drug trafficking, and also, I mean, by arms trafficking. I mean, about a year ago, I noticed in the videos, there's a gang leader named Izo from a neighborhood called Village de Dieu, which is a seaside neighborhood in Port-au-Prince. And he started, parading in his videos. He also has aspirations to be a rap artist with Belgian-made FALs, which are not the kind of guns that you would be getting from gun shops in Florida and stuff. And they have historically been the weapon of choice of the Venezuelan military, and the Venezuelan military's clandestine support of Colombian rebel groups such as the FARC and the ELN.
Interesting.
So what this tells me is, where there's guns, there's drugs, and that Izo at least has a very kind of active relationship with groups in South America.
That's really interesting. We're here with Michael Deibert talking about Haiti and how we got to this place and where we go from here. Michael, where do we go from here? You said that the elections won't be happening in November. Is there a political solution here, or at least a temporizing solution so things don't get worse?
I mean, this might sound a little philosophical, but I think one of the key things is that when you had a peace deal in Northern Ireland, for example, when you had the end of the system of racial segregation in South Africa, for example, all of these peace initiatives came with some admission of culpability on the part of the people who had abused their fellow citizens. Now, far from an admission of culpability, I mean, Haitian parties like Lavalas or PHTK, which is the former party of President Michel Martelly, which also committed a lot of abuses, they haven't haven't admitted that they had done anything wrong, let alone ask for forgiveness on behalf of the population. And I think, to a large degree, the international community needs to take the blinders off its eyes and realize the kind of people they're dealing with in this political class, and some in the economic class as well. Because I've seen now at this point, I mean, I first started going to Haiti in 1997.
Yeah.
And now I've seen multiple generations of kids from these poor neighborhoods cycle through these gangs. And you have kids now who grew up knowing nothing but this gang life in these neighborhoods. And the political system that has utilized them, the economic system that's utilized them for so long, has to change if you're going to have any kind of durable peace. So I would say that's something that in its negotiations with whoever is presenting itself as being a representative of the people of Haiti, that the international community needs to keep in mind.
It's a struggle that we face with Central America, for example, and other countries as well. If you've got a younger, disaffected demographic that really knows nothing except violence growing up, perhaps for their entire lives, what are they going to do with their lives? Are there economic opportunities? But even if there are economic opportunities, is that relevant to somebody who really has grown up in a gang culture and has no particular skills other than perhaps firing a weapon?
And the sad thing I would say, I mean, I'm thinking recently a very famous Haitian author named Frank Etienne passed away.
Yeah.
And he had grown up in a neighborhood called Bel Air, which is near downtown Port-au-Prince, which is it kind of rises on the hills near where the National Palace was. And when I first started going to Haiti, I would go there all the time, walk in there. They made what they call drapeau voodoo, which are these beautiful sequin voodoo flags there.
Yeah.
And there were some voodoo priests there that I would go see. And, there are Frank Etienne's growing up in Bel Air today and in Cité Soleil today and in these marginalized neighborhoods, but the ground that they're growing up on is not allowing them to flourish. So, I mean, there's still plenty of extremely motivated, patriotic, gifted people in Haiti, but the kind of collapse of society and the collapse of the political system keeps them from being able to contribute what they would contribute to the country.
I think that's one of the greatest tragedies of all this, obviously the human cost and the violence, but the Haitian people are the culture is fantastic.
Yeah.
The food, the culture, the history, the arts flourish in Haiti. I mean, you've written about that yourself. You've been an observer of that. And just stifling the spirit of the Haitian people, to me, is one of the greatest tragedies of this. I mean, if you're worried about, how to get food on the table and how to keep your kids safe from getting press ganged into a gang, you're not necessarily concentrating on how to create art or start a new business. I mean, that's a real challenge.
Although I would say, like, one of the things that always impressed me in Haiti is this creative urge, this urge to beautify. And it's exemplified kind of on the, the tap-taps, the public buses you drive, which all have murals on them and things like that. And it's really, I mean, for a number of years, a bunch of activists in Cité Soleil, which is another one of these marginalized neighborhoods, we're working on building a public library, a state-of-the-art public library there. And I and lots of other people would bring books down to them. And that has all stopped because of this violence. And there has to be, as I said, there really has to be a reckoning, I think, among the political and economic class, because it's easy for them to point at like some poor kid from the slum and be like, that's the problem, when in fact they're the problem.
Well, it's interesting too, because if you look at the diaspora, and there are many Haitians in the United States and elsewhere as well, North America and Canada, elsewhere, but these are folks who are hard workers. They contribute to the communities. Right now, Haitians have become part of the political discussion in the United States during the elections, and in my view, in an unfortunate way, but also the Trump administration looks like it might be ending TPS, temporary protected status, for Haitians, without going into if that's the right decision or the wrong decision. If that were to occur and Haitians were to be repatriated to Haiti, what would that mean for the country in terms of security, stability, economic activity?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of repatriating Haitians to Haiti right now, I don't know, number one, how mechanically that would work, because the airport in Port-au-Prince is not open because the gangs were shooting at airplanes and hit them. several times. So are you going to dump these people all off in Cape Haitian, which is the second largest city in the north that does have a functioning airport, which is already rather groaning under displaced people who have moved there. So I mean, that would be another destabilizing factor that would ultimately, I think, come to bite the United States, because, you know, these people, if you're a person who sees a future for yourself, you're probably not going to stay in the cauldron that Haiti is right now. You're probably going to go to the Dominican Republic, or you're going to go to, you know, try to go by boat clandestinely to the United States or the Bahamas or something like that.
Would you predict perhaps another boat lift like we saw in the early 90s and subsequently, or is that probably not in the cards in the immediate future?
I mean,
hard to predict. I know.
Yeah, it's hard to predict. And and curiously enough, from what I know of, that's not exactly my area of expertise, but from what I know, that hasn't really been happening so far, which I don't really have an answer for, because given the reality on the ground, certainly in the capital, you think more people would be leaving, but maybe more of them are also going to the Dominican Republic, which, despite the President Abinader's kind of anti-Haitian rhetoric, is a place where the tourism industry and the agricultural industry and the construction industry are completely dependent on Haitian
symbiotic
labor.
relationship. Absolutely symbiotic. Yeah. Michael Deibert, this is really interesting. What's the best scenario for Haiti? What's the optimistic scenario? If we had this conversation a year from now or at the end of 2025, what would we be looking back on and saying, wow, we're really happy that happened? Is there a scenario?
I would love to see the Haitian political and economic actors who have contributed to the situation recognize their culpability in it. I would like the more enlightened, I guess you would say, members of these various armed groups, because they have different personalities, they're not all the same, to recognize that they cannot simply control territory. They have to build a nation. And I would love the extraordinarily talented and gifted and patriotic people that I meet every time I go to Haiti to be given an opportunity to flourish within Haiti.
Now, that's the optimistic scenario, and it may be the answer to the next question I'm about ready to ask, but what's the most likely scenario for a year from now? What do you predict will most likely be the case?
I would say, given the dynamic that we currently have, Port-au-Prince is hanging on by a fingernail and could fall into the control of the armed gangs completely within weeks or months of us talking now. I hope that does not happen. I hope that the police and the Haitian army and that the international military force that's in Haiti can hang on. But I think the people who are devising and supporting, theoretically or rhetorically, this international military force need to understand that the clock is really ticking.
So then the last question I would have for you, what does the international community need to do, or is there anything that the international community can do to help ensure that that doesn't happen, that Port-au-Prince does not sink into the gross anarchy that you're portraying?
Yeah, I would say you need to get 3,000 to 4,000 more active duty troops, police, however you wanted to characterize them, on the ground to support this force. I think you need to give the Haitian military and the Haitian police, some of whom have behaved very heroically, assets like militarized drones and things like that to use in there, which I think could really help turn the tide against these armed groups. Because right now it's very much street to street, very close quarters fighting. And these armed groups, know these neighborhoods very well, and they have an advantage of numbers, overwhelmingly so, against what you might call the forces of order.
Yeah, there's so much more here to discuss. We don't have time, regrettably. I want to thank you for joining us here at Democracy Dialogue. It's been a fascinating conversation. I hope you'll come back, and I hope next time we'll have some really positive news to be able to talk about progress for Haiti, but most importantly for the Haitian people who are long suffering. But boy, they deserve a better scenario. I think they're really, they deserve it if anybody does.
Thank you, Eric.
I want to thank all of you for joining us here at Democracy Dialogues, where we come to you on the first Thursday of every month on YouTube or at our website, www.as-coa.org. I'm your host, Eric Farnsworth. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.